Hello, and thank you for listening to Technology Simplified, tech talk everyone can understand. I am your host, Will Slappy, and today I am joined by Scott Curtis. Scott serves as a virtual Chief Information Officer, also known as the CIO, here at IT Voice. He is passionate about client success and using technology to help them reach all their goals. He is serious about network security and protecting businesses from holes that make them a target for cybercrime. He also moonlights as the host here on Technology Simplified from time to time. And we have a bonus guest, the incomparable Moses Kingsbury, who is the Director of Engineering here at IT Voice. So when our engineering team has questions, this is the guy that they go to. Moses has spent most of his entire career in IT. He has assisted tons of business leaders to make real-time, informed decisions about their technological development. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let's get started.
Let's do it.
So, business owners have a lot of options to consider when choosing their tech, for the operations. Today, the topic that we want to look at is the traditional file server that a lot of people have been accustomed to for decades, right? That back in the closet that they've got set up, and then there's SharePoint that is included as a part of Office 365. A lot of people are already using that, and then some people that are, got questions. Okay, should I go to SharePoint? Can I do it with the file server? So that's what we want to kind of jump into. And then I know that there's an additional option, which is a cloud-based file server. So kind of take the file server out of the back room and put it into the cloud and look at what that is as a potential third option. To kind of get started on that, Scott, why don't you jump in here and just kind of walk us through what's the difference in those three, different solutions.
Right. Well, and thanks for having me on the show. The differences are, so in a traditional on-premise server, this is what you saw in most businesses for years and years and years, because they've got files and they also have to be able to authenticate to get into the network. And it also gives them the option to allow them to say this employee can see these files, this employee can see these, and break up the permissions. So that's exactly the way a lot of businesses are set up now. And then Microsoft came up with SharePoint many years ago, and if you remember, well, SharePoint used to be this programming nightmare. There were companies out there that were just dedicated to making SharePoint look like what you wanted it to look like so that you could share some company files. And Microsoft, they listened to their customers and finally made it to where it's fairly easy to program, and it's also fairly easy to find what you need because it's got great search functions. The nice thing is when you pair it with OneDrive and Teams, you've got your files all where you want them. You know where your files are. When you share a file, you can work in a file. Moses and I can work in a file together live, and it's really changed. The simplicity has made it so that the common business owner that doesn't know how to program a SharePoint site can actually put one together in a few minutes. So the other thing that's changed is the software that used to be housed on servers that you ran your business with, these line of business applications, a lot of that's going to the cloud. So we're finding a lot of our customers actually have a server on premises, and all they're really using it for is file storage because all of the applications they use are in the cloud. So in some situations, there is a logical jump to say, hey, I'm not going to buy servers anymore because I'm doing my QuickBooks in the cloud, this line of business applications in the cloud. It's all in the cloud already. So why don't I just put my files in the cloud as well, use Office 365 to its fullest extent, and not have to buy hardware anymore?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So Moses, there's the third option, right, which is in the cloud, but a traditional file server. So describe for us what that looks like.
Right. So now with some of the cloud options out there, you can get a nice virtual application or virtual workspace per se. You still access it over the internet. It's still very secure, but the backend is by a provider who you rely on to provide a workspace that has all of your office apps, maybe your ERP apps, any of your other line of business apps, and then has what looks like a traditional file share. So you kind of get a nice hybrid of the both. You no longer have to worry about the servers on premise or expertise to maintain that or to upgrade the hardware. It's now on a cloud provider, and so you get sort of that traditional feel of a file server while getting benefits of cloud services and the things by going to an online provider.
Yeah, that's great. So, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, kind of thinking like, okay, they're trying to figure out what might be the right one for them. And so each one has its pros and cons. So, Moses, would love to hear your thoughts on, as you're looking at those, three, what are the pros and cons to each, and what situations, hey, you know what, like, Scott was talking about, we should just put it all in SharePoint and we don't need any physical servers, and that makes a lot of sense. When it's like, hey, you probably need to keep the file server, on premise in your office, or hey, you know what, it makes a lot of sense to actually go to, a cloud provider but still have that traditional type of file server as well as, the desktop environment and everything. What kind of companies would use each and why?
Right. I think the majority of customers out there will probably find that they fit the mode of being able to explore SharePoint and the benefits. Right. One is most people are already taking advantage of Office 365 and they don't realize that they have SharePoint available to them. Especially if your business is in that traditional sense of, you're mostly using Word, Excel files, PDF. It's a great way to take advantage of the modern technologies out there. It provides you versioning. It allows you to use the online versions of Office and collaborate with your teammates and all of that good stuff. Now, there are some exceptions out there, right? Some companies that might not fit the mold. Let's take something like maybe a CAD design company where they have unique design files. In the versioning and the way SharePoint deals with that may not be as beneficial. So they might look at a traditional file share type environment for those types of files that are large and have some specialties around them, right? And then that's where, if they don't want to have that in-house hardware to worry about, or they want to have the availability there because they're prone to power outages or something where their office is, then that's where you might look at a cloud service provider that can give you a virtual workspace with a traditional type of file share, but still be in the cloud where you can access from anywhere. They have the redundancy for you, the backups, the security. So you kind of get a little bit of both in one. So there are some exceptions there, but I would say when we talk to most clients, the vast majority will fit into that nice new SharePoint model where they can take advantage of that technology.
Well, and I like what you said there too, Moses, that I hadn't really thought about as much, but I mean, probably close to 100% of customers, especially if they already have 365, it's like, hey, you've got SharePoint, you've got OneDrive, right. So it's not necessarily an additional cost. Then there likely is some portion of your business that would benefit, and to your point, Excel documents, Word documents, those kinds of things that all of a sudden 3 people can be in editing at the same time. I mean, I know we do that at IT Voice all the time, and it's awesome because you don't have to, well, who's got it open? Can you close it? All that stuff that happens with the traditional file, server, that you can get the benefits. But I mean, if you're an engineering firm, you might say, hey, our accounting team is using a lot of SharePoint because of the type of files that they're using, but maybe our engineers need to be using more of a traditional style file server because they're in CAD drawings. So it definitely is not like an all-exclusive one or the other. You could certainly have a hybrid between SharePoint, and probably most companies could use SharePoint at least to some extent for some of their files, even if they need, some other portion, in the other.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the technologies, right? Is it allows the flexibility to mix and match and get what you need, what suits your business the best.
Right. So let's talk here about like the kind of the remote capacity, because I think you touched on this, Moses, and there's more companies that I meet out there that are like, yeah, we have no office. And so, what would that look like for somebody, that doesn't have an office? And how, maybe you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into terms of like, hey, I need that. I know I need a traditional file server, but we're remote, so we don't have a place for it. Or we travel a lot. Maybe we have an office, but we travel a lot. What does that look like, and how does that function for somebody in a remote capacity?
Well, that's where a cloud solution brings some advantages, right? It's very much like Office 365 and SharePoint, where it's accessible anywhere you have an internet connection for the most part. So you can connect from the Starbucks or from your MiFi on the road or wherever you need to. And even now with playing in their technologies with Wi-Fi, just the other day I took a trip to Atlanta, and I was able to connect and access our environments the entire time in the air. So it allows a lot of flexibility. You can work from anywhere, just about. Just about everywhere has internet these days. So as long as you can get online, you're able to access your applications, your files, and anything else you may need that's important to the business.
Yeah. So, I know some people will be like, hey, I've got a traditional file server. We've got a VPN. I remote in that way to be able to get access to those files. So, if that's the case, if you've already got that set up, is there any benefit to having a cloud, based type of file server? And if so, what is the benefit?
The traditional method of connecting over a VPN, it solves the problem of getting to your files remotely. It does add some overhead. There is some maintenance there, right? Somebody needs to maintain your firewall systems, your VPN software, your configuration. VPN software traditionally use up resources on your machine because of the overhead they bring, and they bring some complexity that might not always be user friendly to folks that are not real savvy on using these types of software and whatnot. So some of the solutions like SharePoint and even connecting the cloud, if you can type in a URL in your browser, you usually can get access to your stuff, and it's a mechanism that most people are familiar with.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a little bit simpler and easier. And I know when we were talking the other day, you were kind of telling me, like, you get the example of like being on the plane. Like the VPN might get interrupted multiple times, and then you end up with an orphan file if you're trying to use one over a VPN, versus when it's through the cloud system, you could have a really dirty connection and keep getting disconnected, and you wouldn't end up with any sort of issues like you would in a traditional setting. So you brought up the maintenance thing. So I'm gonna flip this back over to Scott. So Scott, when we're talking about these different solutions, how do they compare from a maintenance perspective, and which one is, easier to maintain, or any kind of pros and cons from that side of it?
As far as a physical server goes, I think that the biggest thing you have is capital expenditure to buy it. And they do have a lifespan. It's just, I like to compare it to a car. You have to replace your car every once in a while, and you have to do the same thing with a server. They've got really 5 or 6 years is what you want to keep a server in service that length of time. And so as far as maintenance goes, you don't only have the hardware, but you've also got the operating system that allows it to share the files and allows people to log in and all that. You have to be on a current operating system, a supported operating system, in order to get support if issues arise. So as your hardware ages, so does your operating system, and you need to change that out when you change your hardware as well. And then you have to look at patches, updates, all the things that keep your server secure. The things that make it so that hackers can't get into it. And then on top of that, you can't really trust just one single box to hold all of your company data, so you need to back it up. So there's another expense that goes on to that. You have to back it up. You need to get that backup off site, and you have to have a plan in place for if the server goes down. So that's really, I mean, there's a lot of layers to what you have to do to keep a server healthy and running, and it all really relates to money. It takes money to do all that. Now with SharePoint, if you've already got your 365 license and you got your OneDrive set up and you make a nice little SharePoint front end for it, I don't want to say you're done, because there's a lot of different philosophies. A lot of people like to look at a box in their office and say, that's where my files are. I know where they are. I can see them. The thing with Microsoft is they're in the Microsoft cloud. And guess what? The Microsoft cloud replicates to another Microsoft cloud. So one of the things that we recommend, our philosophy is 365 is great. Office 365 is a fantastic product. SharePoint is fantastic. We recommend that you put a third-party Office 365 backup in place so that those files are somewhere besides Microsoft's cloud. That gives you the peace of mind, almost like if you have a server in-house and you've got an off-site backup. It's kind of same in philosophy to that.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a whole lot of sense in terms of the pros and cons and the maintenance perspectives. What about anything like with speed? And I know that you mentioned before about the OneDrive and how it syncs locally. And what are the pros and cons to the offline file use and stuff like that? In the SharePoint OneDrive world, and any differences that you would see with speed, when you're using a file on maybe a local file server versus with SharePoint?
Well, you've got two different issues. If you're on a really, really slow internet connection and that file in your OneDrive doesn't have a local copy, so you haven't synced it to your local hard drive, then it could take a little while to open it. The nice thing is technology keeps making these file sizes smaller. PDFs used to be huge. Picture files used to be huge, and they're getting bigger as far as the cameras are just getting so much better and taking bigger pictures, but the file storage is actually going down. And so it doesn't take as long as it used to. However, if you've got larger files and you sync all of them to your hard drive, if you've got a big drive, then your hard drive might fill up because it's in two places. It's in the cloud and on your hard drive. So as far as maintenance is concerned, you really need to kind of look at those files that you're in a lot. So if you're in this multi-tab spreadsheet every day, I would recommend you keep it on your drive and on the cloud at the same time. It'll just open quicker. It'll be easier. If you've got these files that you get into once a week or once a month or whatever, I just say keep them in the cloud unless you're going to maybe be traveling. Maybe you're going to be in the air for most of a week and you need to be able to get to them. Well, then you should probably plan ahead and make sure those files are readily accessible.
Yeah. Well, and I love, I use 365 all the time, and I love that it's smart enough to know which ones I use, and it usually has them downloaded. Yeah. So that when I'm on the plane, I'm like, oh, thank God, this one, which is, I think, an advantage to 365 as well, is that you have traditional file server, and sometimes you have the internet connection and it's great, Moses, and sometimes you click on it and it says not available today. And so having those offline files there can be really nice.
Well, what's great about the SharePoint part is the technology working to help you, right? So even files that you work with often, they're large Excel files, and you have it downloaded. When it goes to sync, it only syncs the changes at that point. So your initial copies come down. It might be the longest part of the copy, but once you're working with them, it's smart enough to know I'm only syncing back and forth the changes. So it tries to keep that traffic down and minimal as possible, so your speed's not impacted so much.
Yeah, no, that I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it might be a 10 meg file, but it might be 5K worth of you retype one you retype one word, and that's like a couple of bytes that it sends back, and now it's up to date. So yeah, that's an excellent point. So well, I know we're getting close to end of time. So kind of final comments. We'll start here with you, Moses, and then jump to Scott. Anything else you would want our listeners to know on this topic?
I would just say that, if you've thought about modern technology and you've never really explored it, I think customers should really look into taking advantage of something they probably already have a license for, and realize that there are a lot of options out there. It's not only just cutting over all to the Microsoft cloud and hand everything over. There's hybrid models. There's definitely ways to help your business take advantage of the technologies, and also address special needs that you might have, depending on what you do from an operational perspective. So there's a lot of options out there. Reach out to your provider, somebody who can help you explore those and see how you can take advantage of them.
Yeah, great. Scott?
I'm going to mirror what Moses said. Find somebody that you trust and have them look at your environment and see what actually would be a good fit for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I would maybe say it the exact same thing, but just add one little piece. If you haven't considered it, and I'm just going to say like 2 years, maybe even 1 year, it's probably worth considering again, because there have been, especially post-COVID, there's been so many changes that have happened, and things that used to be issues that maybe was a stop for you in the past may not really be much of an issue anymore. So I think if it's been a little while, it's worth exploring again. Well, hey guys, that's all the time we have today on Technology Simplified, Tech Talk everyone can understand. Thanks, Scott and Moses, for coming on today. We really appreciate having you on the show. Our listeners out there, if you have any questions about today's episode, feel free to reach out. Subscribe to our podcast to stay informed on the ever-changing landscape of business technology. Have a great week, everyone.